Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to talk about what asset management is and its strategies. And I'm going to be talking about asset management from the perspective of the IAM and ISO standards. So this is purely a software neutral tech talk webinar. This is part of a four-part series. Each part can be watched independently. So today is sort of the introduction and the introduction to asset management and strategy. There will be three other parts. We'll talk about the strategic approach to the asset management system. So the asset management system is a subcomponent of asset management, which you will discover today. We'll talk about the benefits of asset management, and this gets into the business side, September 26th. And the last part, we'll talk about policy, how policy drives strategy, and then how we can make strategic decisions. And that falls into policy, strategic, asset management, and then into asset performance. And all these tech talks will be made available on demand. Now, today I'm going to be talking about what an asset is, its associated life cycle, um, what is this asset management, what is the scope, because it's more about than just managing our assets. There's a much larger scope associated with it. We'll talk about the roles and responsibilities throughout the organization, and I'll lightly touch up on some asset management standards that can support you. So what is an asset? Um, and ISO 55,000 defines an asset as anything that adds value to the organization. So assets exist to provide value to the organization and its stakeholders. And what constitutes value, and this will vary depending on your viewpoint. So an investor seeks good profit or capital growth and wants high standards of performance at low cost, while a regulator or a regulator looks for insurance, efficiency, and long-term sustainable performance. So the reality is we all have different needs, but what is an asset? And there's different types of assets. And the physical assets could be a roadway network, rail track network, equipment along our linear assets, our yards, our stations, our facilities. Those are our physical assets. So we all know that a physical asset is an asset, but what are some different types of assets? And there's financial assets, there's information assets, human and intangible assets. So if I talk a little bit about each, a human asset's obvious. It's the behaviors, the knowledge, and the competence of the workforce. And human assets really have a fundamental influence on the performance of our physical assets. And I believe human assets are the most important assets within an organization. We are the individuals that make things happen. Financial assets are the financial resources that are required for your infrastructure investments, for instance, operation, maintenance, and materials. Information assets, good quality data and information is essential to develop and optimize and implement the asset management plans. And intangible assets, the organization's reputation and image can have a significant impact on infrastructure investment, operating strategies and the associated cost. And lastly, the physical assets, which is what I said is the physical equipment in the yard, track, along the roadway. So do we manage all of these assets in our asset management plan? That's one of the questions. And asset management really is the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from its assets. So if we look at this diagram, this graph is from PAS 55 from the IAM standards, an asset management standard, of course. This illustrates these different asset types and the scope of the asset management focus. Asset management will focus primarily on the management of the physical assets, and other asset types are only considered to the extent that they affect the optimal maintenance of the physical asset. So these interdependencies are extremely important in the holistic delivery of asset management objectives, and ultimately the organizational strategic plan. So transportation organizations are heavily dependent upon physical assets, and we need to recognize that deficiencies in the management of other asset types may have profound impact on the overall or long-term performance of our physical assets and thus the organizational performance. So we really need to recognize that all assets will need to be managed in, an integrated and holistic manner. So we've described what an asset is, and it's something that adds value to the organization. The value will vary depending on the stakeholders, and can be tangible or intangible, financial or non-financial. So the value must reflect the mix of stakeholders and their expectations. The best way to satisfy, these potentially competing expectations is to have that cross-functional team and collaboration. So the cross-functional team is vital to the success. There are different levels at which assets can be identified and managed, ranging from discrete equipment items or components to complex functional systems, networks, or sites. And we need to keep in mind that the value in each level is different. So the concept of lifecycle activities is easy to understand at its lowest level of asset granularity, such as physical equipment components. However, assets can only contribute value in a system's context, and more complex systems can have a finite or infinite life depending on how we choose to manage them, especially with a transportation network like a roadway or a rail corridor. So what is the concept of a life cycle? So the principles of an asset life cycle at its simplest level is very clear, right? For discrete components with a creation stage and a period of usage leading to the ultimate disposal. We have no problem with this concept of a life cycle. It becomes more complicated when we acknowledge two realities. So the cycle stages may not be clear cut and may even have duplication rather than the one-off sequence. For example, assets that pass through multiple lives via the sale or purchasing, recycling, or changing the usage. Second, an asset can have an infinite life if it is seen as a functional system. Rather than just an individual freestanding component. And through maintenance and periodic renewal, it becomes complicated to see what is happening. Some asset systems can be sustained indefinitely. This is very common with our transportation linear networks, like road and rail, of course. So when we look at the asset lifecycle stages and the responsibility periods, the first issue arises from the difference between seeing the asset from a physical existence point of view or form uh, an asset management viewpoint. So in PAS 55, the life cycle has been defined from the asset management perspective, from the recognition of the need through to disposal and any residual risks or liability period thereafter. So this proved to be, helpful to break down the barriers between engineering design and projects procurement, operations, and of course, asset usage, maintenance or the asset care, and renewals, and of course, lastly, decommissioning. So asset management is the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value of its assets. I've said that before. So delivering the best value for the money and the management of physical assets is complex and involves careful consideration of trade-off between performance, cost, and risk over all stages of the asset's life cycle. So asset management is vital for organizations that are dependent on the function and performance of their physical assets in the delivery of service products and um, you know or a service, and where the success of an organization is significantly influenced by the stewardship of the assets, right? So this definition of asset management, as shown in the slide, represents a significantly greater scope than just the maintenance or care of physical assets, and is closer to the central purpose of an organization. But what do we mean here at the end when I talk about achieving the organizational strategic plan? The organizational strategic plan is the overall long-term plan for the organization. It is derived from and embodies its vision, mission, values, business policies, stockholder requirements, objectives, and the management of its risk. So asset management translates the organization's objectives into asset-related decisions, plans, and activities shown here on the screen using a risk-based approach. So effective implementation of asset management requires a disciplined approach, which enables an organization to maximize value and deliver its strategic objectives through managing its assets over their life cycles. This includes the determination of appropriate assets to acquire or create in the first place, how best to operate and maintain them, and the adoption of optimal renewal, decommissioning, and disposal opting. So as discussed earlier, the value can have different meanings in different levels of an asset hierarchy. So let's take a look at the next graph on this slide. And value often involves a mix of tangible and intangible benefits or risks. So in which um, case quantification or scaling methods will need to be done for the intangible elements such as reputation, customer satisfaction, employee morale, or environmental responsibilities. Assets themselves have different levels of granularity. Some organizations identify individual equipment items as discrete assets towards which investment, maintenance, spares, or other activities are directed. However, such units generally produce functional performance and value only in a systems context. The network, production line, or infrastructure facility um, is a little bit different. So to maximize value, it is essential that we understand both the inputs of cost and risk at a discrete intervention and asset unit level, so at various stages in their individual asset life cycles. And the higher system integrated levels of benefits or performance realization, again, considering different timescales and horizons. This is why some organizations define their assets at higher levels, such as whole networks or infrastructure systems. It enables a full value for money picture of the lifecycle activities, the inputs. And today, we can see the total performance benefits at a higher level. However, such systems and that level asset management may have reduced precision and agility in determining, what is really worth doing, where, when, and why. So asset management is really a holistic view and one that can unite different parts of an organization together in pursuit of a shared strategic objective. So PAS 55.1 identifies key principles and attributes of successful asset management. And these can be defined as follows. The holistic view, looking at the whole picture, the combined implications of managing all aspects. This includes the combination of different asset types, the functional interdependencies, and contributions of assets within asset systems, and the different asset lifecycle phases and corresponding activities rather than that pigeonholed approach. Systematic A logical approach, promoting consistent, repeatable, and audible decisions and actions. Systemic component is considering the assets in their asset systems context and optimizing the asset systems value, including sustainable performance, cost, and risk, rather than, optimizing individual assets in isolation. Risk base is focusing resources and expenditure and setting priorities appropriate to the identified risks and the associated cost benefit analysis. The optimal component is establishing the best value compromise between competing factors, such as performance, cost, and risk. And this is always associated with the entire life cycle. The sustainable factor is considering that long-term consequence or short-term activities to ensure that adequate provision is made for future requirements. And of course, integrated, recognizing that interdependencies and combined effects are vital to success. So this requires a combination of all the attributes noted, coordinated to deliver really a connected approach to the net value. So good asset management considers and optimizes the conflicting priorities of asset utilization and asset care, of short-term performance opportunities and long-term sustainability, and between capital investments and subsequent operating costs, risk, and performance. So PASS 55.1 indicates that good asset management requires clear direction and guidance from the top management and delivery by appropriate, empowered, and competent employees. Unless a clearly articulated organizational direction and set of priorities are provided, it is very difficult to really determine how best to manage the assets. So conflicting priorities and messages will happen. We'll have a lack of staff understanding the organizational aspirations, and there could be a lack of cross-functional collaboration to the team to deliver them. And this can lead to inefficient and ineffective working and wasted effort and resources, as well as considerable frustration and demotivation. And that's not what we want. So for some organizations, this may require a change in culture. So we need new behaviors and we need new ways of thinking sometimes. Now, if we consider this circle here as asset management, and its scope, it will be part of a bigger circle that we would consider the whole organization. So ISO 55000 defines the requirements for an asset management system for asset management. This is uh, the combination of specific interacting elements that provide direction, alignment, coordination, control, and continual improvement in effective management of assets. So in other words, it is a set of components whose combined effect will deliver performance and assurance of competent asset management practices. This does not cover all aspects of the discipline of asset management. It only considers the must-do items without addressing the should-do, could-do elements. The management system must therefore be considered as a subset of the whole subject of asset management. An asset management system is used by organizations to direct, coordinate, and control asset management activities. It can provide improved risk control and gives assurance that the asset management objectives will be achieved on a consistent basis. And of course, the asset portfolio are assets that are within the scope of the asset management system. However, not all asset management activities can be formalized through an asset management system. For example, aspects such as leadership, culture, motivation, uh, behavior, these all have a significant influence on the achievement of the asset management objectives. These may need these will be managed in a system outside of the asset management system, of course. So it is in the asset management lifecycle delivery activities where the majority of the expenditure happens. So consequently, there are significant opportunities to identify efficiencies through good practice asset management in these lifecycle delivery activities. In the management system, risk and review is a fundamental requirement for a sustainable asset management system. The strategy and planning group contains the core asset management activities required to develop, implement, and improve asset management within an organization, taking into account business and organizational objectives and the effects of changing demand over time on that asset portfolio. Asset management decision making is critical at all elements of the asset lifecycle and should be made in a coordinated fashion to optimize whole life value given any underlying constraints, statutory legislation, or regulatory obligations. So asset management decision making is typically undertaken in parallel with strategic planning and is key to developing optimized asset management plans. Asset intensive organizations rely on data, information, knowledge, and wisdom as key enablers in undertaking both strategic asset management activities and operational activities. So the scope of asset management and it's added there with that box around it. That's the scope of asset management. This definition of asset management represents a significantly greater scope than just the maintenance or care of physical assets and is closer to that central purpose to the organization, as I mentioned prior. So the asset management system is used to direct, coordinate, and control asset management activities. It provides improved risk control and assures the achievement of asset management objectives on a consistent basis. That is from ISO 55000. In this slide, the structure of asset management and its system is illustrated. So the organizational strategic plans and objectives is the starting point for developing and the development of the asset management policy, strategy, objectives, and plans. This in turn directs the optimal combination of lifecycle activities to be applied across the diverse portfolio of asset management systems and assets. This structure highlights the importance of monitoring and continual improvements within the asset management system. For example, in the performance of assets or the optimization of the asset management plan. It further demonstrates the importance of continual improvement externally through direct influence upon the organizational strategic plan and the stockholder expectations. As discussed earlier, this picture shows 6 main elements which are covered in asset management. So let's take a look at each of the 6 components. First, we're going to start with the strategic or the strategy and planning. The strategy and planning group contains the core asset management activities required to develop, implement, and improve asset management within an organization, taking into account business and organizational objectives and the effects of changing demand over time on that asset portfolio, of course. An asset management strategy contains documented information that specifies how organizational objectives are to be converted into asset management objectives, the approach for developing asset management plans, and the role of the asset management system in supporting the achievement of the asset management objectives. So strategy and planning needs to consider the required outputs from the assets, both now and in the future, and the options for delivering these outputs for the optimum whole life cost. In many organizations, this requires consideration of an asset management strategy and objectives over long time frames, for example, over 50 years, to ensure long-term implications of asset management decision making are actually understood. Asset management plans clearly explain what the organization and the organizational plans uh, do with its assets to achieve these objectives in terms of resources and timescales with respect to life cycle activities such as acquisition, maintenance, operation, and of course disposal. And I'm going to move on to the asset management decision-making component here. So asset management decision making is crucial at all levels of the asset lifecycle and should be made in a coordinated fashion to optimize whole life given any underlying constraints, legislation, or regulatory obligations. Having a consistent asset management policy and asset management strategy and objectives provides a stable framework to allow a connected asset management decision-making process. The asset management policy provides the overarching principles which are in place to enable the asset management strategy and objectives, and asset management plans to be produced and implemented. The asset management strategy would typically contain the criteria to be used to optimize asset management decision making. The key to making good asset management decisions is um, acquiring appropriate knowledge and applying this within a robust decision-making framework. An asset management strategy should be in place, which is derived and aligned from that asset management policy. The timing and cost of new capital programs have a significant impact on the organization's success, but are often based on relatively simple assumptions or historic expenditure run rates. In most sectors, stakeholders are making increasing demands for more detailed justification of capital expenditure, which the simple traditional approaches just can't deliver. So when these demands are combined with inadequate asset data and information, plus uncertainty over asset deterioration rates and future maintenance costs, the justification is difficult and requires a much more sophisticated approach. So capital investment planning um, and capital investment decision making is based on an understanding of probable asset deterioration and trading off investments, the CapEx side, at maintenance costs, the OpEx side, and the risks associated with that, and their probabilities in order to optimize a capital investment decision. In order to do this effectively, to optimize asset management, we need to understand the costs and the risks associated with an asset and how these vary through time and usage. So life cycle cost analysis is typically used to determine the intervention or interventions that represent the lowest life cycle cost. Normally, manufacturers and equipment suppliers provide a list of maintenance and inspection tasks to be carried out at recommended intervals for an asset. It is not uncommon for these to be adopted by the end user or the the operator. However, these are very generic and they really take little or no account of the actual operating environment of the asset in question. So to really support informed operations and maintenance decision making, maintenance strategy analysis techniques such as failure mode and effects analysis, FMEA, reliability centered maintenance, RCM, and risk-based inspection, RBI, could be used. These tools are designed to build maintenance routines and plans appropriate for the different failure modes and the different consequences that result in those failures of the asset. As described earlier, um, asset management plans are derived from that long-term asset management strategy and objectives that are designed to ensure that the organizational strategic objectives are achieved in a way that reflects priorities, optimizes costs, risk, and performance, and is sustainable. Asset management plans need to include all significant activities related to managing asset performance and risk, which means both capital and revenue expenditure. To deliver these plans, it requires an appropriate resourcing strategy which reflects the changes in requirements over the planning horizon. So the resources and the resourcing strategy considers the skills and resources available to develop an optimal and achievable solution, which may include a mix of internal and external services. Shutdowns and outages also introduce specific risks associated with interrupting stable processes and systems. So shutdowns and outages are expensive to execute and often require large amounts of skilled labor resources to be mobilized and set to work in a limited space over a fixed duration. So all outages are followed by a startup phase, which by its nature is a high risk period of infant mortality or um, recommissioning problems that can occur. An organization would typically develop a shutdown and outage strategy, which optimizes the trade-off between asset operations and the need to perform work on the assets and considers the various risks and resource constraints. And now I'm going to move on to the life cycle component of this um, graph. So asset, um, the asset management lifecycle delivery activities is where the majority of the expenditure happens. So consequently, there are significant opportunities to identify efficiencies through good practice asset management in these activities. So the asset lifecycle delivery activities should not be considered in isolation as individual activities or rigidly by the sequence in the diagram here. Um, Operations and maintenance, or O&M, go hand in hand in many operation and maintenance cycles, and this may take place before the ultimate disposal of an asset. So although the decisions about I don't know what assets to acquire may have already been taken into consideration, a full life cycle approach to life cycle delivery activities should be adopted. Once an organization has decided that the new or different assets are required to achieve the strategic plan, a choice must be made as to how to create or acquire these. And the four most common delivery strategies that organizations choose are acquisition, right? So acquiring existing assets from another organization is always one way. Building new assets with greenfield sites or add-ons to existing facilities or networks, replacing of existing assets at the end of their service or economic life. And lastly, the refurbishment of existing assets to extend our assets' life. So reliability engineering is the systematic application of engineering principles and techniques throughout a product lifecycle to ensure that a system or device has the ability to perform a required function under given circumstances or conditions for a given time interval. So reliability engineering is an ongoing process starting at the conceptual phase of a product design, including defining system requirements, and it continues throughout all phases of the asset's lifecycle. Now let's move on to asset information. In general, data and information can be improved through a specific management approach that is set out in an overall asset information strategy. So information and data needs to be treated like an asset itself, right? So this defines the activities an organization will undertake to ensure that its asset information meets current and future requirements. In the context of asset management, information typically includes an asset information strategy, which should define how an organization intends to organize, maintain, utilize, and dispose the asset information to support both strategic planning and lifecycle activities. And the asset information standards are required to ensure that asset information is collected, categorized, and provided to agreed levels and to agreed timescales. Let's move on to organization and people, right? People are the most important asset within an organization. So the purpose of this section, um, for investing in people and these enablers is to produce the performance and the behaviors that are needed to deliver the asset management strategy and objectives. The people do, right? The people act. So asset management leadership is required at all levels to ensure asset management strategies and plans are not undone by conflicting perspective amongst departments, professional functions, or work groups on, what constitutes best value, or by a lack of clarity on organizational objectives and priorities. So effective organizations are clear on what activities can be outsourced and what needs to be kept in-house. So their approach to procurement and supply chain management reflects strategic objectives for cost, risk, quality, and performance management. They develop and manage supplier and contractor capabilities and relationships with long-term asset management goals. So organizational structure should complement rather than contradict the asset management strategy. So senior management needs to give careful consideration to where asset management responsibilities sit in the entire organization. Lines of reporting and communications, roles and responsibilities need to be clear and to make sure that we have conductive information sharing. So cross-functional working, multidisciplinary teamwork, and other features of good asset management behavior. So organizational culture is important because it has a profound effect on what people perceive as good and believe is possible. How they behave and how they um, commit to meet the organizational objectives. So a key role for senior management is to proactively shape the organizational climate and cultures that are both conductive to asset management thinking and tailored to specific asset management goals. So competence management is, um, you know, concerned with making sure that there are enough suitably competent people in the organization that are available to match the demands of individual roles and work effectively within teams. So a systematic approach to defining competence and behavioral requirements, selecting and developing staff, deploying and developing them, and managing their work are the hallmarks of best practice asset management. So let's take a look at risk and review. In any management system, risk and review is a fundamental requirement for a sustainable asset management system. So in the field of asset management decision making, it facilitates the um, constant and evolving trade-off between performance, cost, and risk while providing the feedback and review mechanisms to facilitate the adoption of objectives and evolution of understanding of the asset criticality to the delivery of the business goals or objectives or aims. Um, the organization needs to understand its tolerance to risk in terms of safety, environmental, financial, reputational, and performance risk in order um, to understand the criticality um, and appropriately define decision-making processes. Risk and review processes are also fundamental in preparing an organization for significant events like accidents, incidents, or impacts of climate change to ensure that it has appropriate contingency planning in place and mechanisms for assuring business success. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some asset management standards. I referenced the BSI PASS 55 several times. I also included some references from the ISO 55000 standard. The ISO 55 standard, these standards are not asset management standards, they're asset management standards. So there are some other sources of information that the Institute of Asset Management has as well. Over and above that, a group or an organization that has helped me a lot is reliabilityweb.com. I got my certified reliability leadership certification through them. This here is a slide from Maximal World that was presented by the CEO, Terrence O'Hanlon. So it just shows you some elements here of how the aim, and this is the business objectives, drive the asset management. And then here's some asset management standards. But the asset performance here isn't associated with the standards that are being identified. So the asset performance, they have some uptime elements is what they call them to manage assets. So very helpful organization. So again, I would like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to watch my presentation. You can send me direct emails if you wish, or you can add me on LinkedIn. I do post on a regular basis on LinkedIn, whether it's postings or articles, and it's typically associated with asset management.